The night of the Windsor Global Charity Gala had always been known for its extravagance, but this year it felt strangely tense, like the room itself carried secrets heavy enough to bend the chandeliers that sparkled above the glittering crowd. Men in expensive suits and women in dresses worth more than most cars glided across the marble floors of the Hall of Luminaries, laughing softly, sipping champagne, and whispering about business deals disguised as philanthropy. Nobody noticed the tall black man who walked in alone at the far end of the hall, wearing a simple but elegant black tuxedo, his posture calm, yet carrying a quiet authority. His name was Elijah Carter, though almost nobody in the room knew it, and those who did had no idea who he actually was. They assumed he was another attendee's guest, or perhaps sponsor's assistant till their assumptions would soon crumble. Elijah had a smooth, deep brown complexion, sharp cheekbones, intelligent dark eyes, and a neatly trimmed beard. He moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, yet he kept to himself, scanning the room with a reserved caution that made it seem like he wasn't here to mingle at all. His real purpose for attending tonight remained locked tightly within him, even as he accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and positioned himself near the back corner, observing people like a man watching the closing moves of a chess game he had already memorized. Across the room, three of Windsor Global's top executives, Richard Hargrove, Spencer Vale, and Amanda Cross, laughed loudly as they recounted stories of their latest deal wins, each one speaking as though they alone were the backbone of the entire corporation. Richard, the oldest, with graying blonde hair, slicked back sharply and a permanent expression of arrogance carved into his jawline, spotted Elijah standing quietly in the corner and leaned toward the others. "Another one of those diversity charity invitees, I assume," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Amanda and Spencer to hear. Amanda, tall with perfectly styled auburn hair and a glittering diamond necklace, smirked behind her wine glass. Spencer, younger but smug, looked Elijah up and down with a slow, condescending grin, adjusting his silver cufflinks as though preparing to make some grand joke out of the man's existence. None of them noticed the security guards at the entrance quietly watching Elijah with recognition, not from suspicion, but from a silent respect that only a few people in the world earned. As the evening progressed, Elijah moved toward the large screen displaying Windsor Global's new partnership announcement with Carter Innovations, a name that most people in the room only knew vaguely, assuming it was another mid-tier tech firm trying to get a foot in the corporate door. But nobody in the hall knew that Carter Innovations was worth more than half the companies represented in the room combined. Nor did they know that the man in the quiet black tuxedo owned every share of it. Elijah looked up at the screen with an unreadable expression, remembering the last conversation he had with his late grandfather, the man who founded the company from nothing after a lifetime of being denied opportunities. Elijah raised his glass slightly in a silent tribute. He didn't attend galas often, especially not ones filled with people like tonight's crowd. But he had made an exception for this one because tonight was going to reveal more than a partnership. It was going to reveal the truth about who actually held the power Windsor Global believed they controlled. While Elijah stood quietly, Spencer Vale bumped into him on purpose, spilling a few drops of red wine onto Elijah's sleeve. "Oh," Spencer said with a smirk, "didn't see you there." Elijah stepped back calmly, assessing the situation, without anger, but the executives sensed his reserved composure and mistook it for timidity. Amanda glanced over, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "These events attract all sorts of people these days," she whispered to Richard, who chuckled, swirling his wine lazily. Their voices weren't as low as they thought, and Elijah heard every word, though he simply breathed slowly and kept his gaze elsewhere. He had dealt with far worse in his life, and he had learned long ago that some people's arrogance was louder than anything they would ever accomplish. Moments later, when the DJ announced a short break in the program, the executives drifted toward the refreshment table where Elijah stood beside it. Richard Hargrove cleared his throat dramatically. "You know," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "this event has standards. Perhaps next year we'll have stricter invitation policies." Spencer snickered, swirling the deep red wine in his glass with a theatrical flourish. Amanda raised her eyebrows at Elijah as if daring him to react, but Elijah only looked at them with a calmness that unnerved them. It was as if he could see through every layer of their arrogance, every drop of insecurity hidden beneath their carefully tailored clothes. Richard stepped closer, and in one sudden, childish act of showmanship, he tilted his glass and let a stream of red wine splash across Elijah's tuxedo. Spencer and Amanda gasped in exaggerated drunken laughter. "Oops," Richard said coldly. "Guess accidents happen." The room grew quieter as several attendees noticed the confrontation, though none stepped forward. Most of them simply watched, afraid to involve themselves with the executives who controlled so much of the company's influence. Elijah stood still, the red wine dripping slowly from his jacket, staining the black fabric. His eyes remained steady, emotionless, almost frighteningly calm. "You should probably go clean that," Amanda said mockingly, "before security mistakes you for staff." Spencer's laugh echoed loudly as he clapped Richard on the back in approval, but Elijah simply tilted his head slightly, looking at all three of them in a way that made them shift uncomfortably. Something was off. They expected anger or humiliation. Instead, they received silent, steady, powerful, controlled silence. The kind of silence that suggested he wasn't embarrassed at all. The kind that hinted he might actually be someone they should fear. Before the tension could deepen further, the event host walked onto the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced brightly, "thank you for your patience. We're honored to continue tonight's program by unveiling the official introduction of our monumental partnership with Carter Innovations, a groundbreaking company that has redefined technological advancement across multiple industries." The crowd applauded politely. Elijah remained unmoving. Amanda and Spencer rolled their eyes, muttering that the partnership was probably overstated. Just another PR stunt. Richard scoffed, adjusting his tie. "Who even owns Carter Innovations?" "Anyway," he whispered, still wiping laughter from his eyes. "Probably some old tech nerd living in a basement." The host continued, smiling broadly. "And tonight, we are especially honored to introduce the CEO and sole owner of Carter Innovations, whose work has shaped the future of global technology, and whose leadership has transformed the company into an $800 million powerhouse." The room hushed, executives straightened, and whispers slithered through the air. Amanda raised an eyebrow. Spencer blinked. Richard stiffened slightly. The host turned toward the back of the room. "Please welcome Mr. Elijah Carter." The entire hall froze. Amanda's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Spencer's face drained of color. Richard's jaw fell open in horror. The crowd parted slowly as every head turned to the quiet man with wine dripping from his tuxedo. Elijah stepped forward calmly, walking through the aisle created by stunned attendees, each step echoing like a revelation. The executives who had mocked him shrank back instinctively, suddenly realizing the magnitude of their mistake. Elijah didn't glance at them. He didn't need to. He stepped onto the stage, nodding to the host, before facing the massive audience now hanging on to every breath he took. "I appreciate the warm introduction," Elijah said, his voice deep, steady, and impossibly composed. "It's an honor to stand here tonight as the newest partner of Windsor Global. Carter Innovations looks forward to a long and meaningful collaboration." Murmurs raced through the room. Cameras flashed. Investors whispered frantically to one another. Elijah continued, each word a precise blade cutting through the tension. "This partnership is built on respect, integrity, and professionalism. Values I take very seriously." He paused, eyes sweeping the hall, ending briefly, sharply, on the executives who moments ago had humiliated him. "Values I expect to be mutual." The silence that followed was absolute. The hall erupted in applause, though some clapped out of genuine admiration while others did so, simply because they feared what not clapping might imply. Elijah stepped down from the stage with the same calm confidence he had walked in with, but now the crowd parted for him like he was royalty, their eyes following every subtle movement he made. The executives who had mocked him, Rich or Spencer, and Amanda, stood frozen in place, unable to move, unable to think, unable to comprehend how disastrously their arrogance had collided with reality. Elijah stopped beside them only because he needed to pass by, not because he intended to acknowledge them, but the silence they were trapped in forced him to lift his gaze and meet theirs. Their faces were pale with dread. Richard tried to stutter out an apology, but Elijah raised one hand slightly, not in forgiveness but in dismissal, a gesture that said their words no longer mattered and their presence was irrelevant. Then he walked away, leaving them with the agonizing weight of consequences. They could already feel tightening like a noose knot as the evening progressed. The executives scrambled behind closed doors, literally dragging each other into a side hallway to discuss how to prevent their actions from destroying their reputations. "We can't let this get out," Amanda hissed, clenching her diamond necklace so tightly her knuckles whitened. Spencer paced frantically, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "He'll ruin us. A man like that, with money like his, with influence like his, he'll crush us if he wants to." Richard slammed his hand against the wall. "We were drunk, we were careless, we didn't know who he was. There has to be a way to spin this, something, anything." But even as he spoke, dread thickened around them like a storm cloud. They knew the truth. Men like Elijah Carter didn't need to spin anything. He lived above the level where PR strategies mattered. He operated in a world where money and influence weren't tools, they were weapons. Meanwhile, Elijah excused himself from the crowd to step onto the balcony overlooking the glittering city skyline. The night air was crisp, and the cool breeze brushed gently against the wine-stained fabric of his suit. He didn't care about the stain. It was trivial compared to what he had planned long before tonight even began. Joining him outside was Grace Linton, Windsor Global's event coordinator, and one of the only decent people in the building. Grace was a black woman in her mid-30s with deep espresso skin, expressive dark eyes, and a velvet blue dress that shimmered in the moonlight. She had seen everything, every drop of wine, every cruel insult, and her heart still pounded from the unfairness of it. "Mr. Carter," she began cautiously, "are you all right?" Elijah turned to her with a gentle smile. "I've been through far worse than a spilled drink," he said quietly, "but thank you for asking." Grace appreciated his calmness, but her expression tightened. They were cruel, and reckless, and unbelievably stupid. Elijah chuckled softly, not in amusement but in understanding. Arrogance blinds people. It makes them believe they're untouchable. But everything changes when the truth enters the room. Grace exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cool night air. What are you going to do? Elijah looked back over the city, eyes steady. Nothing tonight, he said firmly. Let them sit with their fear. Tomorrow, they will learn the cost. Inside the main hall, the tension continued to build. Investors whispered about Elijah's company. Employees quietly Googled Carter Innovations. And board members exchanged frantic glances as they realized the executives had just insulted not just a guest, but their most valuable new partner. The CEO of Windsor Global, Leonard Drake, excused himself from a conversation and marched directly toward Elijah the moment he saw him re-enter the hall. Leonard was a stocky man with silver hair, round glasses, and a constant air of exhaustion from managing a corporation full of egos. Mr. Carter, he said breathlessly, may I speak to you privately? Elijah nodded and allowed Leonard to guide him into a quiet meeting lounge. As soon as the door closed, Leonard's professional facade shattered, replaced by genuine embarrassment. I heard what happened, he said, barely containing his frustration. What they did to you tonight is unacceptable, disgraceful, and completely against everything Windsor Global stands for. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Leonard swallowed. Mr. Carter, I know you may not believe this, but most of us are not like them. I personally am deeply ashamed. Elijah folded his hands. I appreciate your concern, but I didn't come here expecting fairness. People reveal who they are when they think someone is beneath them. Tonight was simply educational. Leonard nodded slowly. What will you do? Elijah paused, choosing his words carefully. Nothing impulsive. But their leadership positions are no longer compatible with the values you claim to represent. You can address that on your own time. And if you don't, his voice softened, becoming even more dangerous. I will. Leonard understood. The message wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The executives, still panicking, decided to make one last desperate attempt to save themselves. They approached Elijah together, their faces stiff with forced humility. Richard spoke first, voice trembling slightly. Mr. Carter, we want to apologize. Spencer nodded rapidly. We behaved horribly. It was unacceptable. Amanda placed a hand over her heart. We were drunk and didn't know who you were. We're so sorry. Elijah looked at them with calm, unreadable eyes. You didn't insult me because you were drunk, he corrected gently. You insulted me because you believed I had no value to you. Their throats tightened. But, Richard stammered, we truly are sorry. Elijah stepped closer, just enough that they could see the seriousness in his gaze. I am not seeking an apology. I'm seeking accountability. And then he walked away, leaving them fearing the storm that would soon come for them. The gala ended with tense conversations, shifting alliances, and whispers of speculation. Elijah exited the hall quietly, stepping into the waiting black car outside. As the driver opened the door, Elijah paused, looking back at the glowing building behind him. He didn't smile. Instead, he exhaled for the first time, letting the weariness of the night slip through. But deep within him burned something stronger than anger: purpose. Tomorrow would begin something far bigger than tonight's humiliation. He had built Carter Innovations from the ashes of his grandfather's legacy, and he had learned every cruel lesson the world tried to teach him. Now, he had the power to change that world. Across the city, the executives gathered at Richard's penthouse, drinking nervously and trying to devise strategies to save their careers. None of them could sleep. They replayed the moment the host introduced Elijah's name, replayed the blood-freezing realization of who they had mocked, replayed the calculation on Elijah's face when he refused to be shaken by their pettiness. He's going to destroy us, Amanda whispered, sitting on the edge of the leather sofa. Spencer poured himself another drink, with shaking hands. We need to get ahead of this. We need to show the board we're valuable. Richard stared out the floor-to-ceiling window, gripping the curtain. He doesn't look like someone who forgives. Bence's voice trembled. He doesn't look like someone who forgets. And they were right, because while they scrambled in fear, Elijah sat in his penthouse, overlooking the same city, composed, and already planning the next move. His phone buzzed with messages from investors, board members, and global CEOs, all wanting to schedule meetings after seeing him at the gala, but Elijah ignored all of them. He opened one message, only a simple text from his grandmother, the last surviving member of his family. Proud of you. Your grandfather would be too. Elijah closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking justice. And justice would come in full when the next morning's board meeting began. And in that room, the executives would finally learn who Elijah Carter really was. Morning sunlight flooded the towering glass structure of Windsor Global as executives, employees, and board members streamed inside with a tension that crackled through the air like electricity. Rumors had spread overnight, whispers of Elijah Carter's identity, whispers of the humiliation at the gala, whispers of consequences coming fast and merciless. Phones buzzed constantly. No one knew exactly what Elijah planned, but everyone knew he was planning something. Richard, Spencer, and Amanda arrived early, hoping to speak with the board before the meeting began, but the receptionist refused to let them through. "The board has asked that everyone wait until the meeting starts," she said with a stiff politeness that didn't exist the day before. They exchanged anxious glances. That phrase "the board has asked" was never good news for people who were already sinking. Upstairs, in the boardroom overlooking the city, Elijah stood at the window with his hands in his pockets, staring down at the bustling streets far below. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He simply looked resolved. Leonard Drake, the CEO, watched him from across the room, genuinely nervous. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "the board is ready whenever you are." Elijah turned slightly, nodding. "Let's begin." The long mahogany table filled quickly as board members took their seats, men and women who controlled billions of dollars in entire corporate sectors. Their expressions varied, some curious, some intimidated, some embarrassed. When Richard, Spencer, and Amanda were finally allowed in, they looked like ghosts, pale and terrified. They sat together near the end of the table, clinging to each other like they were waiting for a verdict in a courtroom. Leonard cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Given the events that unfolded at last night's gala, and the fact that Windsor Global is entering a historic partnership with Carter Innovations, we felt it necessary to convene an emergency meeting." The executives stiffened. Leonard gestured toward Elijah. "Mr. Carter, if you would like to address the board." Elijah stepped forward, but his voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Last night," he said, "3 of your executives decided that I was beneath them. They did not know my name, my position, or my worth. They judged me based on the suit I wore, the tone of my skin, and the assumption that men who look like me don't belong in rooms like theirs." The boardroom was silent. Elijah continued, "When people reveal who they are, we should believe them. But when leaders reveal who they are, we must act." Amanda's breathing became shallow. Richard looked like he might faint. Spencer's hands trembled under the table. "I am not here for sympathy," Elijah said firmly. "I do not want apologies. I want accountability. Because prejudice, especially in leadership, is not a mistake. It is a danger." He stepped back. That is all. His speech had been short, measured, but every word was a scalpel cutting right through the corporate facade. The room erupted in murmurs. Several board members nodded gravely. Others whispered among themselves about ethics, risk, image, liability. Leonard raised a hand. "We will take a vote on disciplinary action." Richard shot to his feet. "Wait. Please just listen. Sit down." A board member snapped. Spencer tried next. "We didn't know who he was." Amanda's voice broke. "We were drunk," and Elijah looked at them with the same calm dismissal as the night before. "You didn't insult me because you were drunk," he repeated softly. "You insulted me because you believed I had no value." The room fell silent again. The board voted. 30 seconds later, it was done. They were terminated, effective immediately. Security entered quietly, asking them to gather their things. Amanda burst into tears. Richard stared blankly at the floor, nodding in numb acceptance. Spencer clenched his jaw until it trembled. They were escorted out, not violently, not cruelly, just firmly. And that was what made it worse. Their downfall was efficient, clinical, irreversible. But Elijah wasn't finished. When the executives were gone, Leonard turned back to him. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of the board, I want to formally apologize." "Leonard," Elijah interrupted gently, "you do not need to apologize for actions you did not commit. What matters is how you choose to lead after witnessing them." Leonard swallowed. "Then I would like to offer you something. A permanent seat on the board of Windsor Global. Your company may be our partner, but we want you guiding our future as well." The room nodded in agreement. Elijah considered it. He didn't rush. After a moment, he nodded. "I accept." The board members exhaled in relief. Windsor Global had just secured a partnership and a leader who would reshape their entire corporate culture. After the meeting, Elijah stepped out onto the balcony connected to the boardroom. The sun glowed warmly over the skyline, lighting his face in a soft gold. For the first time since the gala began, he allowed himself a deep breath. Not a breath of victory because he did not seek revenge, but a breath of justice. Grace found him a moment later. She approached cautiously, holding a folder to her chest. "Mr. Carter, I heard what happened." Elijah smiled gently. "And what do you think of it?" Grace let out a breath. "I think you handled it with more grace than they deserved." Elijah chuckled softly. "I'm not interested in destroying people, only in improving the spaces they try to control." She nodded. "That's why you're different." Elijah studied her for a moment. "Grace, how long have you been with Windsor Global?" 9 years, she said quietly. "Almost 10%. And has anyone ever offered you a role beyond event coordination?" She laughed bitterly. "Not once. People like me don't get promoted here." Elijah smiled. "Not anymore." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're coming with me," Elijah said warmly. "Carter Innovations has an opening for a director of corporate culture. I think you'd be perfect." Her hands flew to her mouth. "You're serious?" Completely. Tears filled her eyes. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied gently. She nodded, smiling through tears. "Then yes. Later, As Elijah left the building, reporters waited outside, shouting questions about the gala, about the humiliating incident, about his new board position. Elijah didn't answer them. He simply stepped into his car with quiet confidence. The driver asked, "Home, sir?" Elijah looked out the window at the glittering skyline, then shook his head. "No, to my grandmother's house." His voice softened. "I want her to hear the news from me." As the car pulled away, sunlight gleamed across the city and reflected on the windows of Windsor. Global now, a company with a very different future, and somewhere inside that tower, the echo of last night's arrogance faded, replaced by the undeniable truth the entire business world would soon understand. Elijah Carter wasn't just powerful. He was a reminder that dignity is worth more than any empire.